So this was the U.S. President Joe Biden addressing the Congress in his second State of the Union address. This was his second such address to the U.S. Congress. Only this time the Congress was divided, and people in the United States are way more skeptical of their president. Biden addressed the nation with his signature tone of optimism, touting a growing economy and hot labor market. This is actually live at the Capitol Hill in Congress, and the president has just concluded his 2-hour speech, the second State of the Union address by U.S. President Joe Biden. And like I said, the House was divided, especially when he mentioned about debt. Biden in his speech is also celebrated a series of bipartisan wins, from a sweeping infrastructure bill to the CHIPS and Science Act and the first gun safety legislation in decades. He also hailed what he said was record unemployment in the United States in 50 years.
Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years, because of you all, because of the American people.
Let's talk more about this all-important speech by U.S. President Joe Biden. And joining us now is our VOA correspondent Jessica Stone from Washington, D.C. Jessica, I know you've been following this speech the whole 2 hours. What are your highlights from Joe Biden's speech today?
Well, I think it's very clear that the president is making the case for a second term here. He spent more than 3/4 of his speech touting wins on the economy, addressing American concerns on inflation, on unemployment, and also talking about working across party lines to accomplish goals for the American people. These are all selling points for an American candidate going into the 2024 election. He did make a dig at the House Republicans over some of the spending cuts he says they are seeking. You saw a vigorous head shake behind him from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who has taken Social Security and Medicare, some of the largest entitlement spending benefits in this country, off the table for the debt negotiations. But yes, the debt ceiling and calling for raising the debt ceiling, a big feature of his speech. And of course, really, that will be the next test of his negotiating ability, as well as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's negotiating ability, not only with the White House, but with his own caucus, because, of course, he has a very, very razor-thin margin in the House of Representatives right now.
Jessica, let's talk more about this highlight of the speech. And what I will ask you now is, Biden vowed to actually veto any national abortion ban. How do you think that will be taken by Americans and also the Republicans, both Republicans and the Democrats?
Well, we know that according to polls, and you'll forgive me, you're going to hear the helicopters circling. We're so close to the Capitol, and they tend, right as the president is making a movement, you're going to hear those helicopters in the background. But we know from polling that a majority, more than 2/3 of Americans support abortion rights of some kind. And so it always comes down to the details. So when the president says he's going to veto that type of abortion bill, it's much more in keeping with the American public, and I think also a clear sign that he is watching that issue. That issue very much is credited for giving the Democrats good results in the midterms, better than expected results in the midterm elections.
Jessica Stone, stay with me. Joining us now is our correspondent, Susan Teherani. Susan, good to see you. Probably you can also start by telling us what was your biggest highlight in this State of the Union address by U.S. President Joe Biden. And actually what I think stood out for me was the ban on assault weapons. What about you?
Yeah, Eric, a national ban on assault weapons is something that plays very well in a State of the Union address with applause from the Democrats, but ultimately wanting to pass something like that is never going to happen, especially in a divided government right now at this point. And I think the closest that Republicans and Democrats really got together in trying to pass some kind of comprehensive gun reform was back in July after that Uvalde shooting at the elementary school, a tragic incident. And they came together and they talked about background checks and then sales and red flag laws and whatnot. But a national ban on assault rifles is something that, again, as Jessica rightly noted, this really did seem like a soft launch pad for a new presidential campaign. If that's the case, then, it makes sense for him to mention that. And then on the other hand, he is, talking to his constituents when he talks about that.
Jessica, what do you think about Biden's proposal on calling for the assault weapons ban? Do you think Congress will take that forward?
I don't think there is much appetite in this Congress to give Joe Biden any wins on anything that they cannot also claim for themselves as a win. So raising the debt ceiling, coming to a negotiation on that is a likely outcome as long as there are some cuts in defense spending. The White House already knows the sort of the terms and the framework of dealing with this new Republican majority, and that is that they need to come to agreements that give both sides the appearance of having extracted some concessions from the other side, much like the types of international negotiations that countries undertake. So assault weapons ban, I think, is highly unlikely. It is something that President Biden previously successfully negotiated through Congress when he was a senator in the 90s, but it has expired, and it certainly has a lot of support to be reinstated by Democrats. But those key Republicans on the right that have given House Speaker Kevin McCarthy his majority are unlikely to support such a measure.
We also saw in the Congress the presence of Tyre Nichols' family, the mother and the stepfather, and U.S. President Joe Biden once again called on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Susan Teherani, coming back to you, what do you think about this Police Reforms Act? Will it be enacted or will it take some time?
Well, it depends on what's in the act. Inviting Tyre Nichols' parents was definitely something that the president really had to do. And I think that what happened, the tragic incident that happened to him, and how to prevent something like this from ever happening again definitely has bipartisan support. But then ultimately the devil is in the detail. You also need to take into consideration that he was trying to really draw a fine line between bad police officers and good police officers. He talked about how not the entire police force is, acts the way that these individuals did against Tyre Nichols, just because the Democrats have in recent years been associated with, rightly or wrongly, with the defund the police movement. And he was, he has to strike a very a balance, so to say, with, calling for accountability on the one hand, but not appearing to be anti-police on the other. So I think there is an appetite for reform. That's definitely true, but how it goes about, again, is yet to be seen.
Let's talk about the president's approval ratings. And there was a survey that was done recently, and it showed that some of the Democrats do not really have faith in their president. And they were waiting for this State of the Union address to be conducted, and then they see how Joe is going to handle that speech. Jessica, coming back to you, do you think that after this speech, probably his approval rating will jump up a little bit?
Well, it's certainly possible, Eric, because, of course, polls just are a snapshot in time, and we often see that the most recent event skews the polls a little bit. But look, Americans are largely looking at their wallets. They're looking at the price of gas and whether they can find eggs in their grocery store. Of course, we've had a lot of problems with sourcing eggs on grocery store shelves, and that's a staple of the American diet. So I don't think that it would be a bump for long if we see one. And really, this is almost the lowest of his presidency. He has a very low approval rating going into the State of the Union, so he really needs to buttress his remarks with going out on the trail, as he's expected to do tomorrow, going out to Wisconsin, then to Florida, his vice president, going to Minnesota, and to Atlanta, Georgia. Keep in mind, those are also very important states to the Democrats, particularly Georgia, which has become a swing state, and really buttress the argument that the American economic agenda under President Biden is a better opportunity than that the Republicans are offering. And we'll be hearing in just a few minutes from Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is the standard bearer tonight for the Republican Party, offering their vision of the future for the United States. And it's really expected to be a very stark contrast to be drawn, giving Americans a choice as they move forward into the 2024 presidential race.
Our VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. Jessica, thank you. Let me go back to our correspondent Susan Teherani. Susan, there was a unanimous call for unity during this second Union of the State speech. Do you think that really happened?
I mean, a lot of the accomplishments, the laundry list of accomplishments that the president touted during his speech wouldn't have been passed without bipartisan support. What kind of unity we're talking about at the end of the day? Again, as Jessica noted, this debt ceiling is going to be really a test for both Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden to see how close they can come together on the budget, for example. But then on the other hand, you have, many who believe that Joe Biden is, first of all, soft on China regarding foreign policy. They think that his climate agenda is too aggressive. And on the other hand, they think that regarding the border, which he didn't talk much about, he's just, not doing a good job. So, these are issues that the Republicans will put forth, and then we'll have to see, how Biden reacts and vice versa. But I think what was very noteworthy was that ultimately President Biden really spent a lot of time talking about manufacturing jobs, and he actually had a union worker in the box as a guest. And I think that signifies that this administration, notably President Biden, should he run for a second term, really has to appeal to the blue-collar American voter, that he talked about, having difficulties, that jobs going overseas, made in America is coming back. And so I think, regarding that, I think there may be bipartisan support, but ultimately, the sort of initiatives that he put forth that require big government, which was a lot, I don't think he's going to really have that kind of bipartisan support.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.